Welcome to week 8, Love, Philosophical, Theological, Psychological Perspectives. This week we review the short book by Vladimir Soloviev. Out of all the ones we're studying, his is the oldest, writing in the 19th century. He died in 1900, right on the eve of great transformations on the geopolitical scene. And some wonder if he anticipated this in his famous work, Short Treatise on the Antichrist. Soloviev was an interesting figure. I like to think of him as a Russian Orthodox Thomas Merton. Very interested in other facets of life, very able to cross cultures, to cross ecumenical Christian lines and try to build bridges. He also was very significant in developing sophiology, as he influenced many in the sophiology school that would emerge in the 20th century, especially Sergei Bulgakov and Pavel Florensky. And Thomas Merton and Hans Urs von Balthasar, both Catholic thinkers, thought highly of Soloviev and were influenced by him. Now, these are 5 lectures that he had put into a book, and some of the context is helpful to know. So, evolution was a new theory in his time, and so he was trying to make sense of what makes human beings different from animals. So today it might look like some of the things he's saying is androcentric or anthropocentric, but he's talking to people at the time that are not really distinguishing human beings from animals. And so he sees sexual love not as something the animals do per se to reproduce. He sees it as something distinctively human and evolved for humans. That also, at the same time, gives them more responsibility over the act, as we will see. So the other context that he's focusing on here is there was a belief at the time that the more passion that exists between a couple, that the more fruitful the positive genetic offspring that they would have. And we don't hear of this today, but he's engaging it, and he says, no, the passion between a couple has nothing to do with the fruitfulness of their offspring. He says, because oftentimes this powerful passion is unreciprocated, as in the case of courtly love, as we've seen, where the knight devotes to their maiden, but never is the love and the intimacy reciprocated. He says, but when it is mutual, you often see the self-destruction, say Romeo and Juliet, or the case we studied last week with Iseult and Tristan, where they end up both dying as a result of broken hearts. And he goes on to say that even if it is there, that passion is there, lots of these couples have given rise to quite normal kids and children. And quite ordinary. So he's arguing against that. That might be something that was foreign to you. Now, rational consciousness is something that human beings have that other animals don't have. Or we can even talk philosophically, self-presence. Human beings are present to self. And he goes on to argue that the fish can reproduce without the sexual act. Um, Human beings can engage in sexual activity without reproductivity, as that's an instinctual drive, but there's something unique about it for humans, so that he will say that human beings are capable of a sexual love in a way that other animals are not. And he goes through that argument. Um, you look at the amoeba, and the amoeba just divides, doesn't even need another amoeba to do that, right? So as you move up the evolutionary chain, then sexuality becomes part of it. But human beings, and he will go on to say spousal love is something that is unique to human beings and not to other animals. And we recall a line earlier in the course from Rollo May where he says human beings are the only animals, so to speak, that uh, have sex face to face. And to him, that is indicative of something that's unique about human sexuality in human beings. When spousal love occurs, this sexual love is not to be confused with the egotism and sexual selfishness. For Soloviev, the reason two people marry is not first and foremost to have children. It is because they can be portals to one another of the divine. They're opposites complete rather than just attract. And so, in order to donate myself to my spouse, I have to canonically release myself of egotism. I have to surrender to the other person. So that's not egotistical. And it is this spousal love that allows me to overcome my egotism. Now, Soloviev never married, and we don't know that he was in very significant romantic relationships for very long. And so, we're not sure to what extent he's speaking of this from his own experience. What does he call sexual love? His definition, for want of a better term, the exclusive attachment, one-sided as well as mutual, between persons of different sexes, which make possible the relation between them of husband and wife, but in no wise do I prejudge by this the question of the importance of the physical side of the matter. So, of course, he's writing in the 19th century. Today, especially in the West, sexual attitudes have developed in very different ways. And at the end of the chapter, I raise some of those questions. One can say that Soloviev has a high Mariology in the sense of a high marriage theology. It is within this spousal love that one can really attain one's human individuality by contrast with the other person, but also the union with that person fulfills the desires of my human individuality. He says the relation between husband and wife is the relation between two differently acting yet equally imperfect potentialities, which attain perfection only in the process of reciprocity. So this is why the chapter is called Opposites Complete, because he believes on their own human beings are imperfect, that a man and a woman are imperfect, but when they come together in union, there's a higher perfection. Certainly, they're not perfect, morally perfect, as we know that human beings can be flawed and fall short of ideals. But this goes back to his theology of the image of God. And him and other sophiologists will look at the passage in Genesis where it says, in God's image, man and woman were created. So Soloviev and the other sophiologists will read this, that image of God is not complete unless the man and woman are together in unity. And so the marriage is a context where those two images of the divine come together and more fully express the image of God. And I'll leave that for discussions for you all to engage those questions critically. He also talks about the heavenly Sophia, the earthly Sophia. We can contact the earthly Sophia as mediated through other people, and in spousal love as mediated uniquely through my partner. But that also opens up to the possibility of unity with God, of the heavenly Sophia, to be mediated through that union. What would help here for Soloviev would be some examples of this from people, some reports of this, what this would be like. Otherwise, it's theoretical and abstract and can be challenging to get a hold of. But it's also kind of attractive in a day and age where the divorce rate is so high, that he's bringing back this notion that the spouse is a portal to mediate God's love. He says the heavenly object of our love is only one. That's God, the eternal divine femininity. So Soloviev is hammering home here that we need to recover the divine image of God as feminine, whereas traditionally it's only been communicated as masculine. We know we can't reduce to God to gender, so that everything can somehow mediate the divine and give us insight into that. But the love of spousal union for Soloviev does not just open us up to the divine vertically, it opens us up to a connection with the created order. Because I love another person intimately and deeply, and there's a union there, I can also love other people more deeply, and I can love in the created order. He uses the term syzygy, which comes from the Greek meaning a close union. So without love, as Fromm says, humanity could not exist for one day. Well, Soloviev is suggesting that because I'm loved and because I love deeply and intimately, I can then love the created order. And so these dense essays of Soloviev give us an opportunity to reflect deeply and more critically on the role of spousal love in his time and in today.